Welcome to Wine Time with my guest today, Adam Mason, the extraordinary winemaker from Mulderbosch and the Stellenbosch Hills of South Africa. Adam, I'm a little weary this morning. I was up late enjoying your wines with a nice dinner and my family last night. So let's get right into it. Adam, first of all, I'm very interested in you and your winemaking background. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, Mike. First of all, just your readers, obviously, your listeners can't see you. You're looking very fresh, which is obviously a great sign if you've been drinking Mulderbosch heavily the night before and you're suffering no signs of ill effect. That's a good sign.
Especially when you're an old guy like me, Adam. It's really a good sign.
Absolutely. So you obviously passed the two-bottle test, which as a winemaker for me is really important. I mean, we make wines to be drunk and enjoyed. And I would say at Mulderbosch, that's really our primary aim, is to make wines which people come back to time and time again, because they just love the style, they love the quality, and the wines represents sort of true value. That's really what drives us at Mulderbosch, is to create that sort of type of wine.
Obviously very well made, and you're obviously a very good winemaker, Adam. And so I want to know why you're a good winemaker. Where did you study, and where have you made wine leading up to this point that
Sure.
have brought you to the winemaker that you are today?
Okay, well, thanks. It's very, very kind of you, first of all. But I mean, for me, it's, my journey has been, in a way, it's a sort of microcosm of what South Africa really represents in the wine world, in that it's both it's both an old world and a new world producer. And I suppose my background as a winemaker reflects that in the sense that I'm a Francophile, unashamedly, and that was really where I learned sort of my real hands-on winemaking was working in the southwest of France as a young sort of graduate, and full of theory, but with absolutely no practice or no practical knowledge. And I worked as an itinerant winemaker for 4 vintages, everywhere from Entre deux Mers and Côte de Castillon and sort of Bordeaux Superior, all the way through Languedoc-Roussillon, a little bit up into the Rhone Valley, and then across as far as Provence and on the Italian border. So very much a kind of a basic sort of French approach to winemaking, in that it's always centered around sight. I think that is the traditional agricultural approach, is that wine represents a sense of a place and a time and a moment in time, really. That's what wine really depicts. The New World philosophy is more pioneering. It's more kind of relying on new processes, perhaps technology, and a slightly more kind of scientific approach. And I think that's where possibly the kind of the New World mentality comes into it. Obviously, having studied at Stellenbosch University, it's a very good course for viticulture and enology, and I have I suppose, a decent sort of grounding in it. But as I get older, I suppose I rely more and more on intuition and experience to make decisions about winemaking. And it all goes back to how the wine tastes. I mean, more and more I rely on that final arbiter is, am I going to enjoy drinking 2 glasses of this, and could I possibly finish a bottle of this with a good mate or my wife? That's really the criteria for me at the end of the day. Yeah.
Which is what I did last
in a
night with
nutshell.
my family and friends. It was great. They loved the wines, and really a great compliment is my wife loved the rosé, and she's not a red wine drinker at all, and just really was very complimentary about that wine. So I thought that was pretty extraordinary coming from her, actually. And so let's get right in and let's talk about the wines. Let's start with
Sure.
the rosé, because I'm a rosé lover, Adam, and this was completely different than any rosé I've ever had. And
Yeah.
from a standpoint of the nose of the wine, and also on the palate, it was very different. And you know, in the promotional information that talks about blood oranges. Well, this is what you experience in this rosé. And, usually I'm looking for a little strawberry and a little raspberry, but I got to tell you, I love this rosé, and the blood orange was right there, and it had such great balance of fruit and acid in this wine, and it's as we know, rosés are just maybe the best food wines there are anyways, but this one was fun because it was just not the run of the mill. It was very different. It set itself apart from others on any shelf in any retail store, and I loved it. What can you tell me about it?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting, I think, right off the bat, the fact that it's made from Cabernet Sauvignon in itself is very interesting. Cabernet Sauvignon is actually the child of Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc, if you look at it genetically. So it shares a lot of the aromatic qualities of Sauvignon Blanc. And if we think of Sauvignon, what do we think of? We think of pithy kind of grapefruits. A lot of those characters come out in riper Sauvignon Blanc. So it's not unsurprising that you should focus on the blood orange character that you're finding. And I think that's a real kind of, I suppose, a unique character of Cabernet Sauvignon rosés. It's not a tutti fruity strawberry kind of fruit pop kind of a rosé. It's quite a serious rosé. It's got the texture being made from a great grape like Cabernet Sauvignon. But I mean, that's just if you take it back to the vineyard, this wine really does start in the vineyards. We actually source our Cabernet Sauvignon vineyards specifically to make this rosé. And then once the grapes are harvested, we harvest them about 2 to 3 weeks earlier than we would if we were to use those same grapes to make a full-body table wine. And in doing so, harvest the grapes with a high level of natural acidity and with a slightly lower sugar level, so that when we ferment the grapes, we end up with something low in alcohol, about 12.5% is what we're aiming at, and also high in natural acidity, so the wine is fresh without having been adulterated in the winery. So it's a very authentic product in that respect. And we give the farmers an opportunity to crop their vineyards at a slightly higher level for rosé. And the effect is twofold. I mean, the first is that the farmers are happy because they're getting a bigger yield off their lands than they would be if they were making very low yielding red grapes for a sort of powerful, full-bodied red table wine. And the second thing is that we're getting really nice, bright fruit flavors and fresh natural acidity from these slightly higher yields. So it works very much in both parties' favor, and we always like a win-win situation. Going forward, we need commitment from our grower base, and we would like to develop long-term relationships with these guys. So, if they can sustainably farm their vineyards and we can sustainably get really great quality Cabernet, then, everyone's happy. Once those grapes arrive at the winery, they are treated very much like Sauvignon Blanc. So they're crushed and destemmed, and we basically just macerate them for as long as we need to in order to extract the amount of color that we require. And then we press them off as we would a Sauvignon. The juice gets settled, and then it gets racked and it gets cold fermented as we would sort of something aromatic like Sauvignon. And from that point onwards, it's really treated like a Sauvignon Blanc. It gets apart from a lot of lees contact, which we normally reserve for our Sauvignons, the rosés come off lees pretty quickly because we're not trying to introduce creaminess and richness to the palate. We want it to remain zippy and bright and sort of zesty. And then we move the wines as little as possible. We don't pump them from tank to tank. We try to retain as much natural carbon dioxide in the wine from the fermentation, so there's a residual sort of a zip in the wine. And that really does keep it fresh for, up to 2 years after the vintage. So that's the rosé in a nutshell.
It was really enjoyable, and I think for me, color is a big thing with rosé, and most people get it wrong. I find here in the States we get a lot of Pinot Noir rosé, and they over macerate the wine to start with, and so the color is too deep. For me, there's just this perfect color, and I don't know what that is, but I know I recognize it when I see it in the glass. And the other thing that I find with rosés, they're either really well done, which are very few, or they tend to be a little bit on the bitter side because they're not trying to make them too tutti fruity, as you say, but they miss the mark. And for me, this rosé just was dead on. So, hats off to Mulderbosch and to you for that, because it was a perfect rosé in my mind. So I sincerely will be happy to recommend this to all of my friends that I know that love wine. And then nonetheless interesting was the Sauvignon Blanc. Let's get right in and talk about that wine, because and let's just start with the color of that wine in a glass. I mean, the color of that is beautiful. It's got a slight green, yellow-green tinge to it that just looks extraordinary in the glass. And it's a different Sauvignon Blanc because it's a very well-made Sauvignon Blanc. And I love the herbaceous quality of the Sauvignon Blanc, because I usually don't find that in Sauvignon Blancs. I find it more in a Chardonnay, actually, an herbaceous quality. And it was very interesting. I loved it. And I love that, the wine has been allowed to be in contact with the lees, because it just imparts so much depth and flavor in this wine. So tell us a little bit about your Sauvignon Blanc, Adam.
Okay, so I think for me, Sauvignon is a variety in South Africa. It really does, I suppose, personify this sort of dual personality. I always refer to South Africa as this, both a new world and an old world wine producing country. It's old world because our history with wine predates, the Medoc, 1855 classification. We've been producing wine since the late 1600s already. So we're very much an old world philosophy, and yet at the same time, very much a pioneer country too. And our Sauvignons, I think, represent both of those ethoses when it comes to Sauvignon. We have a certain amount of pungency that you normally would expect from New Zealand, although we don't quite hit the same heights that New Zealand Sauvignon reaches with their amazing kind of really kind of pungent wines. And on the other hand, we also definitely give a nod to the kind of the full weighted, sometimes slightly mineral kind of textured Sauvignons that you get out of the Loire Valley and Sancerre particularly. But once again, we don't quite have that same austerity that they achieve out of Sancerre. So South African Sauvignon Blanc very much sits on the fence. And I think it's one of the only times in my life that I'm very happy to admit to being a fence sitter. But it works with Sauvignon, because quite often Sauvignon can be too linear, too austere, and too green. There's an acidity there which is quite hard. And if you don't pick it early enough, you often get that sort of, it's a meanness. On the other hand, if you let Sauvignon Blanc go too far, it can become quite flabby and quite blousy, and it really lacks any sense of kind of rigor or cut. And I think that's what Sauvignon really needs. So what we aim for at Mulderbosch is we aim for the richness and the ripeness that gives you a full palate and slightly more kind of tropical characters. And yet we also pick certain vineyards to achieve that herbaceous quality that you refer to. And where we are positioned in Stellenbosch, we're not very far from the Atlantic Ocean. As the crow flies, we're probably about 6 or 7 kilometers away from the ocean, so maybe 3 miles. And we have a distinct cooling advantage from ocean breezes over our vineyards during the hottest time of the year. And that has a real beneficial effect on particularly a variety like Sauvignon Blanc, which is so delicate. The aromas are so susceptible to being burnt by heavy sort of weather, by high temperatures and heat stress. So we're in a great position to produce the style of Sauvignon Blanc in a lot of areas in Stellenbosch and a lot of areas in South Africa, actually. So, I mean, not only Mulderbosch, but I think in general South Africa it's an interesting country to look for this style of Sauvignon Blanc.
Let me ask you, Adam, you were talking about the heat. What is a typical summer day in South Africa look like, temperature-wise?
Okay, look, South Africa's got such a varied landscape. I'll talk about Stellenbosch. We can hit we can hit some pretty high temperatures in Stellenbosch during the peak of the day. I mean, it gets up to 38 degrees. Is a pretty warm day. On really scorching kind of heat wave days, we can hit just into the 40s. It won't stay there the whole day. It'll maybe get to that point sort of early afternoon, and it'll peak at about 40, and then it might stay there for an hour or two. It really depends on which aspect you're on, whether you're north facing. For us, obviously being in the southern hemisphere, the north facing slopes are the hottest slopes. So you tend to avoid those slopes if you're looking for cooler aspects. All of our Sauvignon Blancs planted on more high-lying vineyards with a south-facing aspect to get the benefit of both altitude and that southerly aspect, which is the cooler slope. And then also being close to the sea, you don't get a massive diurnal variation. You don't get a massive difference between your higher spikes and your lower kind of troughs. It's a more moderated temperature. But on the cooler end of the spectrum, you might drop down to kind of 12 degrees Celsius at night. That's an average day. But then, if you have the right weather conditions, you might drop down to kind of sort of just around 10 degrees Celsius at night. But that's kind of as low as it would go during the growing season. And then I would say your average temperatures in February, I mean, average means nothing, but it's still a term that people look at. In this area, I would say the mean average temperature in February is around 20 degrees Celsius. So it's an ideal range of temperatures for vineyards.
That's interesting, and to be honest, I have not had the pleasure of enjoying a lot of wine from South Africa, and I'm blown away by your wines and your winemaking. So I'll be drinking plenty of the Mulderbosch wines in the future. I can assure you of that. But last but not least, let's talk about this interesting Chenin Blanc that is been made by Mulderbosch. I mean, this was a very enjoyable wine too. I must say, it's great. Mm-hmm. I think it's what a Chenin Blanc should be for me and my palate, anyways. I loved it. So tell us all about your Chenin Blanc, Adam.
All right. Well, Chenin for me is really, I would say, South Africa's vinous treasure, in the sense that it was one of the very early varieties to be established in South Africa. So there's a wealth of cultural history regarding how to farm this grape. It's really formed part of the fabric of our wine industry for the last 350 odd years. So there is a wealth of old vine material. The sites on which Chenin flourish, those have been kind of continuously planted to Chenin. It just seems to have naturalized to South Africa. It's interesting to note that Chenin is our single most widely planted variety in South Africa, and we have the world's largest Chenin vineyard, much more so than its actual native homeland in the Loire Valley. So, I think Chenin is something which we're going to be always flying the flag for at Mulderbosch, being sort of proudly South African. And it's just an incredible wine. I mean, for me, Chenin is one of the most versatile white wines that you can find. It pairs with such a vast array of foods, from really kind of classic sort of savory dishes all the way through to kind of Pacific Rim fusion style foods. It handles spicy flavors too, and also being made in a variety of styles, from bone dry to kind of moelleux or kind of semi-sweet. It really does work across such a wide range of styles. Mulderbosch has pinned its hat on something on the drier spectrum, but ripe. So we're aiming for sort of 13.5% alcohol as an indication. We're looking for some good ripe citrus characters. We're looking for some sort of mango, pineapple characters, but also, some of the vineyards which we specifically choose for these slightly more earthy notes, a little bit more chalky kind of mineral texture. And we have a lot of fun with Chenin. I mean, we have several Chenin blocks across different soil types. And Chenin I find fascinating. If you plant Chenin Blanc on a decomposed granite soil, compared to a decomposed shale or kind of decomposed Table Mountain sandstone, you get three extremely different expressions of the variety. So we have a single vineyard project where we have isolated 3 different vineyards on 3 different soil types, We're bottling those separately, and we'll release those at some point in the near future. But we also take a percentage of those wines and blend those into our Mulderbosch blend. And the idea long term is to find these very interesting sites. And the single vineyard series is almost just a way of isolating those sites. And then we kind of will more and more work with those sites in order to produce the grapes for our Mulderbosch blend. It's a little bit, it has a little bit of barrel fermentation. About 20% of the wine is fermented in French oak barrels. And then we'll mature both the tank fermented component and the barrel fermented component for about 12 months. For about 6 months in barrel and in tank on lees to give it some nice kind of rich creaminess. And then we prepare it for bottling. And, typically the wine will be released about a year after its vintage. So it already has settled down in bottle. It's got a touch of not quite bottle age, but it's certainly kind of comfortable in the bottle. And it's ready to drink, on purchase.
And it's so enjoyable last night, I'll tell you. I had fun. It was a hot day here in Montana where I live. But as I was saying, I was sitting back out on my patio last night and looking up at the stars, contemplating your wines, and had a great evening. They were just beautiful. And I want to thank you for taking time out to join us here on Wine Time with the Wine Guy Mike show. It's been great getting to know you. I love the wines, share them with my friends and family. So I say cheers to you, Adam Mason and Mulderbosch. We love the wines, and I hope that you'll come back and join us again with the next vintage so that we can understand those wines in the next vintage. I hope you'll come back again.
Well, Mike, I sincerely look forward to it. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and thank you very much for your kind words and your great support, and for boshing it up in Montana. Yep, we love it.
we bosh it up well in Montana, especially with your wines, great. Adam. Thank you. Have a great Monday, and I'll chat with you soon.
Okay. Cheers. Cheers, Mike. Bye.